Have a look at this picture. I was out cutting broom, and I've been working for about an hour and a half, making a great big pile of broom, and I'd sort of pretty well cleared the area, doing really good, and just as I was leaving, I started walking away, and on the other side of my broom pile, 30 feet away, this is what I saw. And at first I sort of glanced and said, gee, what is that? And then I realized, oh, I'm dealing with a couple of fawns. And here's a close-up of the two. Both of them were huddled in next to a log. They're probably only about 14 inches long, really, which is the size of my foot. I got size 14 feet. And they weren't moving. And so when I saw them there at that point, what I realized is they'd probably been there the whole time that I was cutting broom. I was using an axe, I was using a chainsaw, an electric chainsaw, but they probably went right into huddle mode. And even when I was standing over taking these pictures, they weren't moving, period. Not even an ear flitch or anything. And they just kept looking straight ahead. They wouldn't look at me. And considering my dog Shay was with me that whole time, what I figure is he probably did find them at some point and more or less said, well, gee, they're not moving, they're not very interesting, and just left them. And when we were leaving, he walked right between the two of them. So obviously, I mean, he'd have picked up on that scent. So they weren't moving. So what happens is deer, or fawns like that, they're genetically programmed to go into this freeze mode. And the mother was probably around somewhere waiting for me to leave. And so after I left, she would have given a signal and boom, they would have been able to go and say hi to her again and probably get some milk. But the key with it is that this ability to just sort of freeze up like this, it happens in dogs as well. I've seen it in cats. And that is when they're just totally overwhelmed, they just go into this paralyzed mode. And you can think of a dog hiding under a chair, really scared, not wanting to come out. Same idea. Now, dogs also show a lot of fear responses overtly. And what I mean by that is you'll see them barking at things. You'll see them showing aggression. You'll see that with little dogs on leashes when you're on a walk, and that is they'll inappropriately want to threaten a German Shepherd. And when you have all this stuff happening, and that is dogs, I'll call it overreacting this way, there's something we can do called a graded exposure. And I just want to go back to a time when I saw this in a tiny dog. This is a Sheltie. And when I see Shelties, I always think of Shelties of two types. One is you can have a Sheltie that is big, and they're 30 pounds or more sometimes, and they're a hefty dog. The other type of Sheltie is your little tiny ones, and they're sometimes even like 15 pounds, and they're almost a bone rack. And this is the case I'm thinking about. This little dog was really, really tiny. And the problem with it is it was also extremely scared of people. It had grown up with very little social interaction, and so because of that, it wasn't able to get used to having people around, and especially having people touch her. And so we had to design a program on how to get this dog out of her shell so she could be touched. And the way we did that, just to give you an idea, is that the woman lived with her daughter and the dog. And her daughter was about 5 years old. And so what we had decided to do is let's get the dog working with the daughter first, because she was smaller and less threatening than a big person. And the way we did it was to get her daughter to lie on the floor on her belly, so that she was really short, and just lie there with some dog treats around her head, literally, to see if the dog would come over. And it took a while for the dog to sort of notice that, oh, this is something I can actually take a look at without being threatened. And it took about 2 weeks for the dog to get over to the daughter. I mean, okay, before that, the only way that they even were able to do anything with this dog was by sort of herding it from room to room, getting outside, and then herding it back in. If they wanted to go anywhere, it's a case of cornering the poor thing and picking her up, which was scary. So we had to try and stop them from doing this as well. So anyway, the daughter was lying on her belly, the dog came around, and finally after about 2 weeks of coming around, and that is sort of like a month from when we started, the dog actually took one of the treats. And what we ended up doing was the daughter, I was talking to them during this process, what she did is she actually just flicked the treats on the floor, and with them being farther away from her, the dog went after them. And eventually she would be taking treats closer and closer, and then finally out of her hand. And I just remember this big day when I got a phone call saying, hey, my daughter was able to sit up against the wall and the dog came up and saw her. Big news, okay? And then finally the dog licked her and allowed some touch. And then once we started getting comfortable with the daughter, I got the mother to lie on the floor and start that process with her. Okay, so that's sometimes what you have to do. That's what we call a graded exposure, and that is we started with the least stimulus possible, as in the threat of the person, and then over time, when the dog got more comfortable, we elevated it. This is what we do with dogs that are fearful out on the street, or they're barking when someone comes to the house or something like that. It's part of a program we call graded exposure, and it really works well to be able to get behavior under control. So anyway, if you're thinking about working with your dog, trying to get any behavior sorted out, now's the time to do it, so that way you've got lots of lead time before Christmas occurs, for example. It's not going to get any better, and the sooner you start, you're going to have a well-behaved dog in your house that you're going to be able to love more and more. And also, you're going to take the stress down in your dog, and that's the key here. I want to try and get all the dogs out there so that their stress is down, they're not having to bark, they're not having to defend things, and they're just comfortable with life. So if I can give you any help, send me a note. Okay, take care. We'll catch you in the next one.